Hello. So today we're in Toronto. We just exited the Old Mill subway station, crossed the Old Mill Bridge, and are now walking along a trail in Etienne Brule Park, which follows the Humber River. And we're walking northward along that trail to a site related to the Indigenous history of the region. So the Humber River is directly behind me. I just showed a panning shot of it. And in the 17th century, this river was a major transportation corridor. It essentially linked Lake Ontario with Lake Huron through a long portage that was called the Toronto Carrying Place. And it was close to here that there was a Seneca village called Teiaiagon. The site of Teiaiagon now lies within the Toronto neighborhood known as Babie Point, which is kind of right behind me here, uphill a bit, overlooking the river valley. Babie Point, the neighborhood, was named after a French-Canadian fur trading family who settled in this area in the 19th century. So while I walk along the trail through Etienne Brule Park, along the Humber River, I'll speak a little bit about the history of the Seneca village of Teiaiagon. So this village was established in the 1660s in a period of time when there was a general northward movement of Haudenosaunee people. This followed a treaty with New France, several treaties actually, between New France and several different Haudenosaunee nations in the 1660s, which sort of enabled this expansion to the north shore of Lake Ontario. And this was predominantly undertaken by Oneidas, Cayugas, and Senecas. So keep in mind, in this period, the Haudenosaunee are 5 nations in a confederacy with each other. So it's the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and you have 5 nations. So the village of Teiaiagon that we're interested in today is a Seneca village, and this was the westernmost village of these 7 new North Shore Haudenosaunee communities established in the mid-17th century. Now, Teiaiagon was strategic because it was basically established on the point of the Humber River where it was no longer possible to travel any further by canoe. So you traveled on Lake Ontario, you went up the Humber, and then when it no longer became possible to go any further, that's when you had the village. So Teiaiagon actually was at an important place called the Toronto Carrying Place. And this was a long portage that essentially connected Lake Ontario to the waters to the north, which included Lake Simcoe, Georgian Bay, and of course Lake Huron, and therefore the other Great Lakes. So very strategic site that the Seneca wanted to have control over in this pivotal period. And why did they need control of these more northern areas? Well, it was predominantly for the fur trade. You have very rich fur trapping grounds around Lake Simcoe, Georgian Bay, and Lake Huron. This is also following a period of time when the Seneca and the rest of the Haudenosaunee nations defeated their rivals, the Wendat Confederacy, whose ancestral homeland was essentially between Lake Simcoe and Georgian Bay. So now that the Wendat had dispersed, had fled their homeland, the Haudenosaunee wanted to control this territory. Recollet missionary and explorer Father Louis Hennepin was known to have spent about 3 weeks at the settlement in the late autumn of 1678. Here's what he had to say about the village. Quote, "We sailed on and arrived safely at the further end of Lake Ontario. We came pretty near to one of their villages called Teiaiagon, lying about 70 leagues from Fort Frontenac or Cataraqui. We bartered some Indian corn with the Iroquois, who could not sufficiently admire us, and came frequently to see us on board our brigantine, which, for our greater security, we had brought up to an anchor into a river. That river falls into the lake, but for fear of being frozen up therein, we were forced to cut the ice with axes and other instruments. The wind turning then contrary, we were obliged to tarry there until the 15th of December, 1678. End quote. The village of Teiaiagon likely consisted of 20 to 30 longhouses that provided shelter for anywhere from 500 to 800 people. The village was fed by the abundant salmon and other fish in the lower reaches of the Humber River, by the game and plants within the river valley and its marshes, and by the surrounding agricultural fields where Seneca women cultivated corn, squash, and beans, which were also known as the Three Sisters, which were essential to Haudenosaunee agricultural practices. In the early 2000s, the undisturbed burial plot of a Seneca woman was discovered at the site of Teiaiagon, dating to the 1680s. The site contained a moose antler comb engraved with a bear and a rattlesnake-tailed panther, which may possibly represent Mishipiju, or the underwater panther, one of the most important of several mythical water beings among many indigenous cosmologies, including the Haudenosaunee. The design of the comb is elaborate and depicts a human form connected to the animals. The image we're seeing on screen is a replica. The actual comb was reburied with the woman following indigenous protocol. By the late 1680s, escalating French military pressure compelled the Haudenosaunee to abandon their North Shore settlements, and Teiaiagon was abandoned around 1688. But this was not the end. It was merely a strategic withdrawal. Through agreements like the Great Peace of Montreal, the Nanfan Treaty, and the Dish with One Spoon Agreement, the Haudenosaunee would continue to identify the North Shore of Lake Ontario as part of their traditional territory and hunting grounds. Today, through artwork, plaques, and signs, which I'm showing on the screen now, the city of Toronto seems to recognize the Indigenous history of the region that predates any European presence in the area. My plan is to eventually return either in the spring or summer to more fully explore and appreciate the Humber River Valley and the Toronto Carrying Place. Thank you for watching.